Dr. Najib Jai. Thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, great to be here. Very excited for the conversation.
Excellent. Yeah. So why don't we start with you telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it really starts with my childhood. So I was born in North Carolina. Although my mom is originally from Haiti and my dad's originally from Morocco. They met in New York many, many years ago. And then my mom was actually in the Army in North Carolina. And so I share all that to say that even my heritage is very non-traditional. And so too is my childhood. I moved around a lot in the state of North Carolina. Ended up going to 6 different schools from multiple elementary, middle, and high schools. All were dramatically different demographically and socioeconomically and whatnot, which was incredibly formative in terms of just the way that I look at the world. I appreciate just the diversity of thought, of background, and experience, and I enjoy it a lot. Was incredibly fortunate to go to Duke University, where I aspired to be very specifically a neurological surgeon. My thesis for my career in life was always that I wanted to have a really meaningful impact on the world. And I figured, given my limited background, what I knew was available, that what better way to do that than to impact the brain, the magic organ, the essence of who we are as people. And when I started at Duke, I'd never had a class in chemistry, calculus, or physics. I got a degree in chemistry, not because I wanted hard things in my life per se, but because as a pre-med, I had to take those classes. And I appreciated the way that it made me think and how it molded the way that I would develop as a person. But all that means that I really didn't get an experience in exploring all the different options I had available to me as for my career. It was a blinders on, laser focused approach towards achieving this goal of neurosurgery. But I've always been the product of mentorship. And I had a tremendous mentor my first week of college. She was dean of admissions for Duke Med, a pediatric cardiologist, and a part of the first class of Black students to integrate Duke undergrad way back when. So an incredibly impressive woman. Her name was Dr. Brenda Armstrong. And first week in college, she said, look, neurosurgery is fantastic, but you're not going to have a job until you're 40. So when you graduate, just work for at least a year to have that very adult experience before you go off into the doldrums of medical education. And so took her advice. I worked as a research chemist in between undergrad and going to medical school. The year was pretty unremarkable career-wise. I was working as a research chemist. It was a pretty straightforward dynamic and job. But the year was transformative. I was applying to medical school, and unlike all the other prior experiences I had in life, I was really open to what all existed for my career, and I had the opportunity and resources to explore that. So concisely, I got exposed to the business world and the intersection of business, innovation, technology, and healthcare. And I realized that my goal of having a large-scale impact was really at that intersection more than it was down truly any traditional path, but particularly the traditional practicing physician path. And for a variety of reasons, one, that I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, but 2, I knew that it was in healthcare. I decided that I would still go to med school, get my MD, and also get a really good MBA. And during that combined degree process, explore more and flesh out exactly what it was I wanted to do at that intersection. Was incredibly fortunate to go to the University of Chicago, where I really just had the privilege of seeing so many instances of how healthcare is broken on the south side of Chicago, whether it was gun violence or trauma or the incredibly high prevalence of chronic diseases, and the fact that people didn't have historically access to healthcare resources. They weren't benefited by knowing the ways in which they could have lived healthy lives. And in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they were dealing with those consequences, not because of their choices, but because of the limited resources they had. So I had that experience while simultaneously being at the cutting edge of all the new and exciting things that were happening in healthcare, and decided ultimately that my path was going to be one of an entrepreneur, that I wanted to build something that was going to impact people like the ones I saw on the south side of Chicago. But I didn't know what I was going to build yet. I know I wanted to interact and build something for older patients, so people that are 65 and older, which means they're on Medicare. And I wasn't sure exactly where, so decided ultimately that I was going to work at a really premier company in healthcare called Oak Street Health, where the focus was really around how do you provide high value care for older patients and typically patients with lesser resources. Tremendous experience, formative in how I think about healthcare, how I think about healthcare as a business, and how I think about healthcare technologically. And after my time at Oak Street, where I was focused on specialty care, so thinking about cardiology for people that had heart problems or nephrology for folks that had kidney challenges, I ended up leaving and joining a venture capital firm in New York called Alicorp, where I had truly the opportunity of a lifetime to build a company with the support and resources of a venture capital firm. And in early 2023, I co-founded Conduce Health. And most concisely, what we do at Conduce is support patients in accessing high quality specialty care that's personalized for them. I think this idea that you and I need the exact same type of medical care just because we're the same age and have somewhat similar backgrounds is inherently inaccurate, scientifically, practically, so on and so forth. And so what we focus on at Conduce is first really understanding patients' needs, their backgrounds, their unique characteristics, and then leveraging all of that in a data science fashion with augmentative AI to then determine which specialist provider is going to be in the best position to provide high quality care. I've been doing that for a few years, and entrepreneurship is really hard, but it's equal parts rewarding. And I think a big part of that for me is that I love it. I really enjoy it. It gives me a lot of fulfillment. And despite the challenges that are affiliated with it, I could not, nor do I want to do anything else. So yeah, it's a little bit about my background, what I do now, and things that are important about me.
Excellent. Yeah, incredible story. Clearly, you've had lots of experiences. I want to touch on the mentorship piece in just a bit, but want to start with this idea of, it seems like there's this common theme of almost taking the road less traveled throughout your path. You choose those uphill battles, and it seems like they've defined your career, even from majoring in chemistry in which you had no background, right, to going to medical school and pivoting to something more entrepreneurial. So can you talk a little bit about what maybe choosing the road less traveled has meant, what's inspired that drive, and maybe just learnings that you could offer to folks listening?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an astute observation that I've thought about a lot. And it's funny because in retrospect, I've consistently chosen the road less traveled and definitionally the uphill, harder decision. But at the time that I made those decisions, I don't think I really appreciated it. It was the harder path. I think my guiding light has always been pursuing things that matter to me and things that I enjoy. As I talk about that gap year in particular between undergrad and medical school, the singular lesson that I learned from that year was not that I wanted to become an entrepreneur. I didn't figure that out for another 5 years or 4 years down the road. The singular lesson that I learned that year that has stuck with me ever since is that doing anything less than exactly what it is that I want to do isn't worth it. We live in a world now where even if that specific thing you want to do doesn't exist, you can literally make it. And there's a beautiful freedom that comes to that is associated with that concept and idea. And it's an ideal that I believe and that I live by. I just don't think that I have to abide by what has been done. Precedent is important, but doesn't have to be defining or mandatory in anything that I do. What is important to me, though, is finding the things that give me satisfaction, finding the things that challenge me, and ultimately the things that are aligned with what I want to accomplish with my life and that I feel like I'm good at. And so saying that framework to say that my consistent calculus has just always been, what is it that I want to do right now in this moment? What makes me happy? What do I enjoy? And the second piece is, what's going to get me to that next step? I chose chemistry because it was really hard. I failed my first test. And at that point in time, I had never failed a test before. And I knew that if I could work really hard at that subject and in that first class, that the lessons and the scar tissue that I would build would help me for the rest of my life. Forget my career, like my life, that it would be that formative. I got an A in that first class after failing that first test. And then I chose to stay on that path to continue to have those experiences. So again, it's never been about being different for difference sake. And it's certainly never been about trying to find the hardest thing because it's hard. It's always been about doing things that are aligned with me, what I want, and ultimately where I want to go in life.
And it seems to like almost an holistic mindset. You know, I'll brag on you for a second, but you know, Ultrarunner, sub 3 hour marathoner, former bodybuilder as well, competed, former bodybuilder. You know, it seems like this approach you're taking is not just in your career, it's not just in your studies, but it's on the physical side. You know, I know you're an intellectual as well. You read a lot, you study a lot outside of work. You know, it seems like it's more than just a career strategy. It's an overall mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to comment on that in a second. You know, if that's true, then confirm. But also want to talk about this idea of resilience. So you mentioned failing a test and continuing. Lots of folks we know, pivoted majors once things got tough. Can you talk a bit about what kept you in the fight? You know, what tools you use to continue to push forward when things do get tough?
It's interesting because resiliency is very much a muscle, and in that way, it gets stronger the more you have to exercise it over time. So going way back when to the early days for that specific experience where I failed that exam, it was a shaking experience. I felt very uncomfortable. I felt a lot of uncertainty and momentarily a massive lack of confidence. And the first thing that I sought out in that moment was someone who I felt like had been through that experience before that I could gain insight from. I had a cousin who went to Harvard. He was 7 years older than me, and he was the only person I knew that was very close to me that had done something like that. Went to a very impressive school and managed to do well. And so I remember talking to him to just get his insights, to learn, how did you do it? How did you make sense of it? And then the second thing was I just worked really hard. I ended up taping that test to my desk in my room. So every time I left my room and came to my room, I had to look at it. And it wasn't something that was demoralizing. It was more of a reminder for what it was that I was working towards. And then I saw the results, right? And from the moment that I saw that first result of a slightly better performance on the test, it was the first big inflection point in that resiliency muscle. It's like I was finally able to, bench 2 plates or whatever it was, right? Like I had reached a milestone of, okay, I didn't die. I can make it through this challenging experience. And then I did better on the the third test. And then I, got a really good grade on the final, got an A in the class. And I bring that up to say that entire experience taught me an important lesson that I don't think I could have articulated then, but after having gone through it so many times afterwards, I certainly can now, which is that oftentimes people will say that failure is inevitable, right? And I don't disagree with that. I do think that failure is inevitable if you're constantly trying things. But I think what I've begun to appreciate is a bit more subtle, which is that failure is not only inevitable, but it's a prerequisite. That if you're going to do something that is incredibly important to you and maybe very challenging to accomplish, you're going to have to fail before you get to that point. To your point around going beyond just career and academia and everything else, I mean, from a physical perspective, how do you grow muscle? How do you get faster? You have to fail. You have to get to a point of exhaustion during your run where you try to go beyond your abilities. And then whatever that boundary or limit was, it pushes out just a little bit. Right? But you had to fail in order for that to happen the first time. Yeah. When you're lifting, you have to tax the muscle until the point where you can't curl it anymore. You reach failure. And then the next time you do it, it might be 2 more reps before you get to that boundary, to that point. So I think concisely, it's one about believing in yourself, putting in the work, and then trusting that when you fail, that is just the beginning of getting to the ultimate goal. And I recognize that at my point in my career, in my life, I still have a lot more that I want to accomplish. But I can look back and say, you know what? Every time before I did something, I had to fail first. And it makes the process of failure not easier, but better to understand and contextualize in the process of what I'm trying to do. So I think much like failure, resiliency is also a prerequisite for success. And that's built the more that you have to go through these trials and understand that you're able to overcome them. And I think college, I think grad school, my career has been a perpetual lesson in remembering that and continue to build out that skill set.
I'll speak for myself for a second. It's been very helpful along the way to be able to speak to folks who have been through a fire of some sort and come out the other side. We talk about failure. Some folks, their crowning achievement was that third venture that turned out to be a failure instead of a success. And it caused them to rethink the way that they were approaching their career. It caused them to kind of humble themselves after the first couple successes, few successes. And so, those sounding boards have been invaluable to me. I have a strategy as far as how I've gone after mentors or thought about mentor-like relationships. Can you talk a bit about how let's say you identify someone you want to begin conversations with and stay in touch with, how you approach establishing a mentor relationship? How do you approach cultivating it? How do you think about it in terms of, is it quid pro quo, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a key phrase you just used was mentor relationship. And I think that second word is the critical piece here. It's a relationship. It's like a friendship. It's like a romantic relationship, in the sense that you're going through the same process where you're finding someone that you have some sort of shared ideal with, right? So I think it's better to speak less in abstraction and more in specificity. So I've had mentors my entire life. They've not always been the same people. They've shifted throughout my career as my aspirations have shifted. And sometimes I've had to put together sort of a hodgepodge of different people that represented in aggregate what I was trying to do, but individually, maybe less so. And so in medical school, that was a particular challenge because I was a medical student who was not planning on practicing medicine, but doing something in the business world. That's really hard. You're surrounded by physicians who are not doing that. And you're surrounded by business folk that are not physicians. And so I had a really important task of trying to piece together what my investor network, my mentorship network was going to look like. And I think step one was being in the right place at the right time. It's not dissimilar to any other relationship. You find your friends by doing things you like and finding people that do the same thing. So whether that was at particular events or at seminars or talks or, even just being in certain spaces, whether it's, a run club or the gym, truly, it's a matter of being in a place where you know that the other people that are there have some set of shared ideals. So I think that's first, is you want to be in the right place at the right time to meet those people. And then I think once you identify someone who either is in a place you want to be one day, or has a way about how they carry themselves, or how they've conducted their business or their life that you really respect or appreciate, it's being very honest in approaching that person and trying to understand them. What have they done? How have they gotten to the point where they are today? What have been the things that they failed at? And I say that to say that people enjoy talking about themselves. It's one of the first things you learn when you interact with another person, is that the less you talk and the more they do, the more that conversation will likely flow. And so I think the first thing is get to know that person by getting them to talk more about themselves, is I think the first step to mentorship, after you've sort of found those people that you feel like can be your mentors. And then I think the second is getting an understanding of how important it is for them to invest in someone else. Dr. Armstrong, one of my most important mentors, the thing that allowed me to feel so comfortable and trusting of her advice was that I felt like she thought I was more impressive than I thought I was. So seeing someone or finding someone that sees something in you that you can't see, or put differently, finding someone who believes in you is an incredibly important tenet, and you can figure that out very quickly. Because as you're getting to know someone, if they're returning that and they're trying to get to know you, and they appreciate you, and they value you, and they treat you as an equal, even though this person in theory is so much more impressive than you are, or they're a few steps ahead of you, but they're talking to you as though you're right there with them. You can begin to appreciate that that person sees something in you that they value.
Yep.
And that's incredibly meaningful. So I think it's being in the right place at the right time. It's getting to know people authentically, genuinely, and then it's looking for that reciprocity. Is that person trying to also get to know you and understand you? And I think once you have that foundation, you have a relationship. You have someone who have some sort of bond with. And I think where that goes in terms of how you structure it, for me personally, I've always kept it very organic. So I don't typically throw around the idea of, do you want to be my mentor, or making it very formalized. It's not that anything's wrong with that, but I very much believe in building relationships. And relationships don't always come with formulaic structures. They just sort of happen. You have that conversation, you exchange contact information, you get coffee, you have a very specific problem or challenge that you want to thought about. And so you talk to this person and they give you your insight. I mean, that is the nature of mentorship. Even if I'm not calling it that, that's what that person is for me. And that's been my process. I've been super fortunate to just be in the right place at the right time, be introduced to people or find people because we have some set of shared ideals, get to know them better, have that been reciprocated towards me as they've tried to get to know me. And then I go to them with what I'm thinking about, what I need, what I'm trying to make sense of. And they pour back into me, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. And when there are times where I can help them with something, whatever that might be, if it's talking to someone else or being a part of an event or supporting whatever endeavors they have, then of course I'm there for it. And I call that part in particular because it's not a quid pro quo. It's not a matter of you do something for me and I'm doing something for you directly back. It's more a matter of you support me, I support you. This is what we do, where we have this relationship. So it's sort of an unstructured way of thinking about mentorship, but it's in part because I have to look back retrospectively to think about how I've had my mentors, and none of it was necessarily intentional. It just sort of happened because I was trying to build relationships with people who I very much respected.
Yeah, that's excellent. It's excellent. And one of the values that I've found in mentorship too is guidance when I'm considering a career path that is, atypical. You talk about, obviously the transition from med school to business. And, I wonder too, if you want to speak on it for a second, if you intentionally looked for mentors who embodied where you saw yourself going, or if you looked for mentors who could kind of be a sounding board, kind of playing devil's advocate almost, just to make sure you're pressure testing how you're thinking about things.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Honestly, the further I got down my unorthodox path, the harder it was to find somebody who truly looked like where I was trying to go. And I think part of that was because at this point, I've curated such a specific path that it is quite hard to find people that are like that. However, I have people that I trust. I have people that are pragmatic, and I know that I value the way in which they think about things. And so at this point in my life, in some regards, it's less of finding that person that's doing the exact same thing as me, and it's more about trusting that person that knows me and also just knows a lot about a lot of things. And so I've gotten a lot of value from going to my mentors. I'll give you a very specific example. When I realized that I didn't want to practice clinically before going to medical school, I met with another mentor of mine, tremendous woman. She was leader of the multicultural office at the medical school, just a great person. Her name's Maureen Cullens. And she, of course, was Miss Cullens and still is Miss Cullens to me. And I went to her and I said, Miss Cullens, I don't know that I necessarily want to practice medicine. Maybe I just pull my applications and just go off and try to do something different. And for her, she didn't really have that experience. She wasn't an MD. She didn't have a PhD or anything like that. And maybe that was why she actually gave the advice she did, but she said, never underestimate the power of credentialing, particularly as a Black man in the United States. That if you walk into a room with an MD and an MBA, people can tell you that you're inexperienced, but they can never tell you that you're underqualified. And that was one of the singularly most important pieces of advice I've received in making my decision to go off to grad school. So she's not an entrepreneur. She's not a doctor. She doesn't have an MBA. She doesn't have any terminal degree. And yet she provided such sound advice that I needed in that moment. And it resonated with me because I trusted her and I knew that she knew me and I knew that she was a smart person that would provide advice that would be helpful.
Want to shift gears a bit.
Sure.
It's tangentially related, but in my experience, I've found that over time, what I perceive to be my purpose or my end goal has evolved. Usually impacted by different experiences or different people. We talk about mentors who are doing different things, or just folks you never expect to kind of nudge you in a slightly different trajectory. How has your purpose evolved over time? Maybe we start with what would you describe as your purpose? How has it evolved over time? And final kicker would be, for those listening who are still trying to figure out their purpose, what tools or what suggestions might you have?
There's something that immediately comes to mind, which is what I want to accomplish with my life. I struggle a little bit semantically with the concept of purpose, because I think that I'll share the prior point in a moment, but I think this is a really good concept, and I think this relates to the last point around advice for those still trying to figure that out. I think it's important to have a guiding light and principle about what it is that you want to do. I think it's also important to understand what you value and what's going to be meaningful for you. And to your point, I do think that evolves with time, with knowledge, with where you are in your life, in your career, and who you're with during those periods of time. But I think spending time understanding what those things are perhaps is more important than actually having like a very discrete, like, I exist for this specific reason. And that might be an unorthodox perspective, but that's my brand. So, but the thing that I want to do with my life, the thing that I want to make sure that I accomplish before I die one day, has always been to have a historically significant impact on healthcare. That's something that I do, not necessarily me, is written about in a history book or in whatever equivalent of books we have in the future. But I want to have a historical level impact, that something truly did change the world because of something that I did. And it's always been that amorphous in description, because I knew that that would have to come about in a way that I didn't fully understand when I was, younger and first conceived of the concept. I thought neurosurgery would be the vehicle to accomplish that goal. And then, as I mentioned, for a variety of reasons, that changed. And for a while there, it changed into something that wasn't specific. It was, I think it's something that involves technology and innovation in healthcare. I don't know what that is, but I was okay with that. I was at peace with that because I had a process by which I knew I would eventually find that path. And maybe this is also just a part of my personal philosophy, but I do believe there's an order to the world. I can't quite describe it or, give exact validation to its reality. And, I'm not necessarily a very religious person per se, but I do believe that things happen in the way they're supposed to happen. And I just need to play my part in that being the case. And so saying that to say that I've always been very open as to how I got to that goal of having a historically significant impact. And I knew that it would need to be based on my values, what I cared about, what I was good at. And where I found myself now is that I truly fundamentally know that it's entrepreneurship. It is new venture creation. It is making companies that have impacts on hundreds of thousands, millions of people, more than I could ever do clinically with one patient, and more that I believe I could do in any other area of what's available to me in my life. And so that's what I want to accomplish with my life. I think my purpose, like why I'm here, growth, development, doing something for other people. I mean, you know, as an example, my mother largely operated as a single parent throughout most of my childhood. And she had 3 of us at one point that she was taking care of, 3 kids. And being multilingual, she spoke Spanish, and where we were in North Carolina had a burgeoning Mexican population that almost only spoke Spanish in some cases, despite the fact that she had 3 kids, and despite the fact that she was only a school teacher and didn't have a massive salary. I grew up watching her do everything she could for those families, whether it was buying diapers, helping them navigate, resources for housing, food, whatever it was. And that taught me that at the end of the day, all of this is about doing something for the person in front of you. And I think that's a big part of what guides all of my decision making. I want to continue to be better so that I can be better for those around me. And ideally, eventually accomplish that goal of something that's historically significant.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. I think about purpose, at least the process of determining purpose, as really just moving forward. You mentioned things, happening as they should, and I'm a believer in that too. I think my purpose, when it has evolved, has largely been in response to new experiences. You mentioned trying to determine the vehicle by which you would accomplish the goal. I think for me, as I reflect on my career, my purpose has always been one around compassion for others, kindness for others. But I think that while I haven't given the exact response a lot of thought, I've definitely given the vehicle by which I get there a lot of thought, which is defined by my values, how I want to treat other people. It's prioritization of winning versus how you play the game. And that's why I'm trying to find tools to give folks to, I think I see lots of young people I speak to become paralyzed by the idea that they have to figure out their purpose right now.
Exactly right. Yep.
And they can't act until they do.
Yep.
And that's why I'm stressing so much about the evolution of purpose.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you get there, it is a destination, but there's so many pit stops along the way, and it's never going to feel fully baked, I think.
Yeah.
At least it hasn't for me.
I think that's a great point. I have a question for you in that context, but I think that the thought that comes to mind as you're describing that is that purpose is process. It's a process. It's you're always defining and redefining and growing and exploring. And I think it's such a beautiful point around just how paralytic the idea of trying to find something so amorphous, but then if you're not careful, so important and easy to put on a pedestal about what it could be, as opposed to just going through the process of your life and what you like and what's important to you, what makes you happy. And I think that in the process of doing those things, you find purpose in what you do with your life, right? It's not, you don't go out to set to find your purpose. You go out to do the things you care about and that are important to you. And there, in that moment, you find what your purpose is, right? And so I think that it's a focus on a process more than it is on a destination. But I'm curious to your point around some of the experiences you've had. What have been moments in which you feel like what you thought was your purpose was challenged, or maybe the vehicle of getting there was challenged? Like, how did you navigate that?
Yeah. Coming out of undergrad, was super, super excited about working on Wall Street. That was my goal. And I thought success looked like, the 2.2 kids in a Brooklyn brownstone, while working on Wall Street, being very comfortable financially. I think while I couldn't necessarily define my purpose, it certainly was tethered much more to my career and financial success. I think what began to challenge that was the realization that there are tons of ways to make money. I was in sales and trading, and so by nature we were pitching stocks. And essentially stocks are, for forms of ownership in different companies, and you begin to realize that there were founders of these companies. And there were folks who had ideas that built businesses that we're now talking about trying to own parts of. And so what I began to realize is that this is not the only way. It seemed like a sexy way coming out of school, and it's a way a lot of people highlighted or paid attention to. You mentioned putting things on a pedestal. Those Wall Street offers and those, I don't know if you remember the canvas bags with the banks on the side, the Patagonia vests, like that. There was a look, there was a lifestyle associated with that. And, you know, when I got there, enjoyed it. It was great. Found great mentors at Credit Suisse. But began to realize that that wasn't the life that I wanted.
Why was that?
Because first off, I thought the lifestyle wasn't sustainable in terms of the way I was living. I think that I was pouring myself into the role, and I think that's what's required to climb quickly. But I had very little time for myself outside of work. Frankly, I gained 15, 20 pounds, I think, in the first year and a half, 2 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you go from, 175 of muscle to 185, 190 and you haven't been in the gym, you realize, the swing. I realized that wasn't necessarily how I wanted to live my life. And so, what evolved for me was not the desire to be financially successful, but what form that could take. And ultimately what I wanted the end, or more of the end, to begin to look like, and how I wanted to feel about myself on the way. In New York, I didn't feel like I was taking care of my body. I didn't feel like, I was constantly, it was challenging in the best of ways. I really appreciate the challenge. But what I realized is that I wanted ownership over something. I wanted to be able to point at something and say, this is what I created, It led to me leaving Credit Suisse to go start a business with my brother. And so, you talk about failure, that's entirely, we can talk about, my story has lots of twists and turns too, but I think, the realization that I could make money a lot of different ways, not just the ways by which I was exposed, up until that point. But also building the confidence of having climbed that mountain, gotten to the top, and kind of looking around and thinking, this is, I don't know what I expected, but, getting the Wall Street offer and working on Wall Street, it was more of a checkbox to me that almost allowed me to give myself permission to look other places, because I didn't feel like I was giving up on something. I felt like I accomplished the goal. Now I could then assess, whether or not it was something I wanted to do.
I think it's such a beautiful thought, because what I've found is that the people around me, or the people that are much further in their careers and lives that I really respect, all seem to have that exact, in various different iterations, experience that you described, of realizing I don't have to do it this way. It's almost like a moment of enlightenment, and people get there in a variety of different ways. But I just find it so beautifully fascinating how consistent that is, because you describe that, it's like, and that's my story, and that's such and such a story, and so's story. And I think going back to this idea of prerequisites to success, or prerequisites to happiness, or whatever that might be, I think failure is one. And I think having that moment of realization or enlightenment that you're not pigeonholed to how you previously thought about your life is very much a second. Because I think we all know people who either never have that moment, or have that moment and disregard it. And I don't think it ends very well. I feel like one thing that's interesting is just what we were talking about, like the seasonality of mentors, and how certain people are in your life to provide guidance at a certain time, and when that time passes, so too, in some instances, do the value or values they can provide to you, and not being afraid of that. Like, and I'm curious for your thoughts here or your experiences here, but like, I mean, I've had countless instances where either it was mentors in high school that once I went to college were no longer necessarily in a position to be mentors, mentors in college that served a really important role, and then I went off to grad school and that became less relevant. Mentors in grad school, and all the different internships and things I had done and exploring as I was figuring out what it was that I wanted to do. And then I moved on or did something different, or, for the longest, I thought I wanted to do private equity, and that was what my mentor base looked like. And then I didn't do that. And I found myself in this entirely new world of new venture creation and VC and startups and everything else. And I looked around and I thought, wow, I don't really have anyone here, which wasn't a scary thought, but I think it more so just illustrated how, looking back, I'm so grateful for the lineage of different mentors I've had, but I also recognize that some of it's seasonal, and that's okay, especially when you're taking very different paths and always letting your sort of your values or the process of purpose dictate like where you go. But I'm curious for your perspective, like what's been that dynamic of like the changing of your mentors, particularly as you went from like Credit Suisse to starting a company to like baking again and then B school and private. I mean, yeah, like what's that been like for you?
I had to come to terms with a couple of ideas. The first was that while I intentionally do not consider it a prerequisite in mentorship for that person to believe the way that I do, or encourage me to just go down the path that I'm trying to go down. I also think that once I make a decision, if someone is still adamant about telling me to turn back, at some point I have to cut them out. And I think it's much more prevalent in entrepreneurship where you see this when folks who are very W-2 oriented really project their fears onto you about potential failure, about instability, about all of it. And so I think the first thing I had to come to terms with is that, not everybody's meant to be with you in every season, as you described. I think the other thing, and it's the different side, it's the other side of the same coin, is, I think a large part of my personality is maintaining peace. I really like, I avoid friction where possible. I'm not afraid to have tough conversations, but I usually like to avoid friction. I like to, keep people like smiling and having a time. Like I much more prefer harmony than anything else. And I think at some point, especially after realizing that I outgrew some people, I felt it then became my job to either try to elevate them or stick around as a thank you. And I also had to accept that helping everybody or giving my time to everybody is the same as helping nobody. And really giving myself a disadvantage when competing against other folks who could be sharper. I can think of a mentor now that popped into my head, someone who was at one point serving me for sure. I was straight out of college. They were successful in their own right in finance. And they were very interested in seeing me, quote unquote, fight the good fight at the firm, which meant, and this is, I've had this sentiment echoed to me from multiple people at different points in my career, being Black in these spaces that are predominantly white. Lots of folks take the viewpoint that, if you're the only, then you have to stick around until you flip the script, even if you're not welcome, and even if you feel it's going to take you years fighting uphill in order to get there. Like that is your battle post now when you show up to that friction, that pushback. And I found that's not my battle. Like I can't stay in a place where I don't feel welcome. I know the future looks bleak and they're not going to promote me unless I show them I have superhuman strength, you know, whereas I could take that same level of effort and devote it to something I care more about, or something that, you know, serves me, entrepreneurship, something that directly benefits me. And I think get further in my career. And so the mentorship thing is interesting because I think, you know, I asked you the quid pro quo question earlier. I think part of me really searches for a way to make these relationships mutually beneficial, however I can. And I think a part of that is almost like, if I feel indebted to someone, I'm going to continue to work until I feel I've, you know, shown some value to them. And I had to let go of that because I feel like the power is in a forward-looking giving trajectory and just giving forward, paying it forward, as opposed to getting fixated on, you know, making sure I'm fully whole in the place where I am with the people that I know now.
I think that's that last point is a really interesting one, because I found myself often, when thinking about the people that have decided to invest in me, thinking about, what are they really getting from it, right? Because, you know, I wasn't at any point throughout all of these different mentorship experiences really in a position to give them something of like commensurate value that they were doing to me. I mean, it was always going to be lopsided in that dynamic. And what I found is, as I have gotten older, as I have been in a position to be a mentor to other people, I now understand what my mentors were getting from it, which is that it feels good. Like people, like being a mentor, I do believe is a self-selecting thing. And when you have a mentee or mentees that you really believe in and invest in, and you want them to be successful, just being there and being able to like help them avoid the landmines that maybe, you know, you didn't avoid in some cases, or like get the lesson from like the painful experience that they don't need to go through in order to get that learning and move forward. I mean, it feels good. There's something that feels inherently fulfilling about knowing that you can positively impact somebody's life in a material and specific way. Like I can materially go to you and say, hey, this is what you should think about before you apply to medical school, or this is what you should think about before you decide to start a company, or here's the things you need to really orient on your first 6 months of the company that you started. And I can say that with conviction because I've been there, I've done it, I know it, and I can articulate it in a way that's helpful for someone else. An experience I felt like I had a lot, and why maybe mentors have always been so important to me, is that I learned, I don't know, around high school, that the way I thought about things and the way I communicated how to, you know, understand algebra or calculus or science or whatever it was a bit different from a lot of the teachers that I had. And I ended up effectively teaching myself a lot of content just by like reading books, and once, you know, the internet was more prevalent, like going online, like learning things. And I say that to say that I think once I was able to translate something into my language, it was an empowering experience where when I see somebody who I know, because they're a little bit further behind me, speaks the same language, and I can explain something to them in a way that I know they're going to get it, because if I was them, or when I was them way back when, if someone had done the same thing to me, it would have clicked. It would have made sense. I mean, it's incredibly fulfilling. And going back to this idea of, you know, purpose, right? And like sticking to your values and your ideals and what makes you happy. I think that's a really big part of it. And so it's just interesting as you reflect on that point of like trying to find a way to reciprocate to these people. And I think, you know, for those who are seeking mentors, and even now as we continue to find mentors in our lives, I think that we almost have to trust that when people decide to do these things, they're getting something from it inherently by doing it. And there's really nothing that mentee can do to ever give back. They just got to trust the fact that just by being there and asking the questions and learning and growing and developing, like that is what you give. to that mentor, the growth, the development, like that's the gift. But to your point about seasonality, I think I'm curious, you mentioned how once you realized that what you needed to do and what your mentor was advising you to do was no longer the same. I mean, talk about both having the courage and confidence that even though this person you had trusted and given you so much insight beforehand was telling you something different, that you still knew what your true north was. Like, how was that? And to your point around sort of maintaining harmony, how did you manage kind of the thanks but no thanks once the season ended? Like, what was that like, that confidence and that ability to break off that relationship?
Yeah, I think to answer your second question first, there was never a clean break in the relationship I'm thinking about. It was more so just a check-in every quarter became a check-in every 6 months, became a check-in once a year, became a see you when I see you. And I don't think that there's any love lost in that, because there was no, I mean, you kind of alluded to, there's no obligation really. And so I don't think there was a clean break, and I'm fine with that. I think, especially in a world where everyone is running hard after something, like the people that have the time to care about whether or not you're still thinking about them and wanting to hit them up are almost people you probably won't see in the rooms you're aspiring to join. So not that folks don't matter anymore, but it's much more about, I think the mentors that I've chosen to date understand it. I have chosen to this date. Understand they understand the game. They understand time is limited. They understand, they won't be the one person that provides me everything that I need to get to where I want to go. And I think if you can fully embrace that, you're not the end all be all for one person. Then when someone stops reaching out to you for advice or, goes a different route, if you know that you're not the person to help them, I hope you wouldn't feel bad about that person, not hitting you up anymore. To answer your question about when I realized there needed to be, when I realized there was a strong enough divide to begin to lessen
take the courage to do that.
Yeah. So I'll preface this by saying there are already very few people I see and think I would like to emulate that person. There are people who I see and think I would love to match or exceed their success in this one area. Very few people that I holistically consider to be true North Stars. I think my dad's one, my grandfather's one. It's never been tough for me to really separate myself when I feel like someone is no longer really serving me. Again, ending all things on good terms is always a priority of mine. But if we're not serving each other, then why are we wasting each other's time is kind of how I think about it. And so it was never for me a matter of courage. It was more so a matter of the ability to make a decision. Once you make that decision to go in a different direction, I mean, as well as I do, with the races we're running and the competition we face, you can't have a divided mind. You have to be fully bought in. And so to have a voice in your ear constantly questioning you, you're not going to be successful.
And maybe to that point, I'm curious, it's one thing for there to be an established mentor relationship, and for a variety of reasons, the season ends and that relationship, one way or another ends, at least relative to what it was. Tell me about, and I'm curious because I'm trying to think about this too, but when have you recognized that someone who theoretically could be a mentor probably shouldn't be?
Yeah, yep.
Right? Like, talk about the discernment of knowing who's the right mentor, and maybe like, you know what, I thought you were this, but in reality, not so much. Like, what's your experience been with that?
Yeah, I think the same is true in romantic relationships.
Yep.
Where you only know what you know, and you only make your decision based on what you know. But the more you begin to learn, the better attuned you can be to how close you should get to someone, and how much you should maintain the relationship or not. I have been one of the things I've learned, especially after leaving business school, is that the world is so much smaller the more focused you get. And to have a reputation, to have your reputation be destroyed or even questioned, your integrity be questioned, or any of your values be questioned, your loyalty, any of that, in such a small network, where, you know, one wrong move or one missed opportunity could mean lifetimes of a difference in a career. I think what I protect most outside of my peace is my reputation. And so the moment associating with someone tarnishes, or I perceive it could tarnish my relationship, immediately done. I think I do have non-negotiables, so lack of integrity, non-negotiable. Because even if people aren't talking poorly about that person, or they haven't, you know, it hasn't come out yet, I know that it potentially could. And I know that if I'm close with that person, it's going to come back on me. So lack of integrity is one. Lack of loyalty is another. If I notice that someone's extremely transactional, I'm not getting very close to that person. And just as a general rule, I don't really get into bed with very many people at all. I don't like to, and I think you're the same way, where, you know, we can be friends out, we can say what's up, but, you know, when it comes to actually getting,
it's a very tight-knit circle.
Circle. And so I operate the same way. I don't like, I love when people can say good things about me. One of the things that I took away from business school, actually, and I was journaling about this, was being in control of that first sentence. And I talk to my mentees about this too. The idea that when someone says your name, what is that first sentence that they say right after? Oh, you know Najib? Oh, he's that guy who... Or, you know Ross? Oh, he's the person who... Like, controlling that first sentence and being laser focused on protecting that first sentence. Making sure that it's positive. And in business school, there were folks who... And, I mean, in business school, you know the environment. It's hundreds of people. You're never going to meet everybody. And so oftentimes you're relying on...
whatever reputation you have.
Exactly, in order to determine whether or not you're going to associate with that person. And like it or not, the moment you make a first impression that's poor, or a strong enough impression that's poor, it's tough. It's tough. I think what comes to mind most for me about the first sentence is when I decided to train for Ironman. This was second year, first and second semester. The idea of saying no to parties because you have to wake up at 5 a.m. to swim, or earlier to run, right? Or bike. Many folks thought that I was doing too much. And initially, a part of me had FOMO, and a part of me really wanted to not disappoint folks who were saying, dude, you can't miss this party because, you know, XYZ reason. I had to step back, realize, one, not only was this something that I wanted to do, but if this became my brand, I'm fine with that. But two, recognize that the folks who were pushing me away from that goal either didn't understand it, or if they did understand it, didn't have my best interests at heart. And so my first sentence became, oh, you know Ross? He's the guy who's training for Ironman. Or like, you know, he runs all the time. Or, you know, whatever it was. You know, until that point, it was, oh, he's the guy who's into search funds.
Right.
Like, I always try to control it to a positive as opposed to a negative.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about reputation, there's a
Yep.
roundabout way of answering.
No, but I got it. Yeah.
When it comes to mentorship, it's very easy for me to end mentor-like relationships.
Yeah.
When I recognize that person's reputation rubbed off on me will tarnish.
I love the idea of having articulated non-negotiables for, I mean, anyone in your life at large, but particularly in the application of thinking about mentorship. Like the idea of people that you, that are trustworthy, that are loyal, that won't impact your reputation negatively in other ways. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And maybe the one thing, and I agree with all of it, I think the one thing I would add as well is like understanding where everyone has a bias inherently. Everyone has their own unique vantage point on the world and how things are supposed to be. And I think even with some mentors, there has to be a certain filter by which you evaluate what it is they're telling you. And there could still be some golden nuggets in there, but you can't always take everything wholesale for how they represent it. Another, maybe not non-negotiable, but consideration when it comes to mentorship is really understanding what is this person's vantage point? How does it align, or what other parts of them align with what it is that I'm trying to do? What is it about them specifically that I respect? And I think you highlighted that as well. It's never a matter of I want to emulate this person in totality, but there's a specific sliver of who they are that I respect and want to match, and understanding where that sliver begins and ends, and therefore where that person's influence will be helpful and then maybe hurtful, I think is also really critical. And then to your point, if none of that's clear, if all that's either, obfuscated in some way, shape, or form, and or there's a violation of these non-negotiables, it's like, well, okay, this person probably isn't the right mentor for me. And I think an experience I've had with that a little more recently is understanding when on paper someone may have certain successes that I want to emulate. So whether they're, a founder who's done incredibly well and they've exited a business, and like at the conceptual level, yeah, I also want to do the same thing. But the way they do it, or how they prioritize things, or how they value people, and how they value building genuine relationships, and how they move through the world, that might be materially different. And even though the outcome they've achieved is something I want to do, for a variety of those other things, and perhaps some of those non-negotiables you highlighted, this person's not going to be someone that I want to be my mentor, even though they could help me with all these various things. And so, yeah, I just think it's a really good point.
Question.
Yeah.
What would you say is the toughest thing you've ever had to do? And lessons you learned from it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the toughest thing I've ever done is the thing that I'm currently doing, which is starting a company. Hands down, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Not the 55-mile ultramarathon, not the, challenges of undergrad and all these other things. No, it's starting a business. And so I guess two things. It's why is it very challenging, and like what I'm learning through it. I think the challenge of it is that you live in a perpetual state of ambiguity in a lot of ways. Anyone that's ever been a part of a startup or co-founded a startup or anything like it will tell you that the path is always nonlinear. Regardless of the outcome, whether it was good or bad, like you never just arrived there. There was always these ups and downs, roller coasters, and you never really know what's going to happen. And that can be very challenging. Even if you're comfortable with change, that level of uncertainty about what's going to change and when can be very hard. I think this concept of binary outcomes of, sometimes things either work entirely or they don't work at all. You either sell that contract and get the deal executed and have revenue, or you don't. Either get the investor to provide a term sheet and you fill out the round, or that doesn't happen, or all these other things that occur. So I think beyond just the ambiguity, what makes it really hard is that you are not fully in control. I think there's a false narrative that by being an entrepreneur or a business owner that, you get to control everything and it's your world and it's everything you want to do. And in reality, in a lot of ways, you surrender a lot of control. You can control your microcosm, what the business is, how it works, strategic decision making, who to talk to, how to, message certain things. But at the end of the day, that is necessary but insufficient to accomplish the aim of growing a business and inevitably building something that's meaningful. And so you really do have to relinquish control to your customers, to, in some cases, like providers of capital, whether that be equity investors or debt or whatever it is, and that can be really hard, particularly for people that are accustomed to controlling their outcomes in lives. And I think you almost have to be, and maybe this transitions a little bit to the lessons piece, you have to get comfortable knowing what's within your power to control and what's not, and knowing the difference between the two, because if you don't, you will drive yourself crazy. And once you go beyond understanding what you can control and what you can't control, making peace with both, right? Making peace with knowing this is all that I can do, and I'm going to do it as well as I possibly can, as consistently as I possibly can, and in the way I know it's supposed to be done. And this I have no control over. And I am just going to have to be patient. I'm going to have to be resilient. And I'm going to have to just see what the outcome is and then go back to what I can control and continue to focus on those things. And it's a constant give and take of just understanding that it's a perpetual process that you have to be patient towards. You have to be able to understand what's in your control and what's not in your control. And honestly, I think that the other lesson that I've learned is that maybe two other big ones. I think one is self-honesty. You do yourself no favors by not being honest about the reality of your circumstances. The idea of sort of like grounded or realistic optimism, right? Where you can simultaneously acknowledge there's a paradox about this that is eluding me. There's a name for this concept, but basically it's acknowledging the full extent of what's in front of you and how hard it is, while simultaneously being optimistic about your ability to overcome and accomplish it. And I think that level of genuine honesty is required in order for you to solve the problem. If you're not being honest with yourself, with your team, about your current circumstances, you're not going to be able to allocate the right resources and make the right decisions to have a chance at controlling the things that will help you get past it. I think that's one. And then the last thing is, every business is an assortment of people. It's really easy to forget that. We just think, oh, you have a really good idea, you have a really great, hot, sexy market, and you invest in the things and it works and everything's just going to come together like it's incredibly copacetic. But no, businesses are people. Businesses are a collection of people, and how those people operate, what their ideals are. I mean, you talk about sort of relationships, and I think there are fewer intimate relationships than the ones that you form while building a company. And knowing that you may disagree sometimes, and how do you disagree, and what are your shared ideals, and what do you do to make decisions, and who makes the decisions, and how do you arrive at those decisions if there's disagreement. I mean, there's just so many pieces to it. And what I've realized is, in full transparency, that teams change, people change, and that's okay. And going back to this idea of things going the way they're supposed to go, that if you continue to control the things you can control, the right people will be there. You'll find them, right? It may not always be predictable or in a linear path, but they'll get there. And when they're there, and all of you are controlling the things you can control, all those things you can't control start to go in your favor. And there's something about momentum that is the last thing I'll say here, but I have two words that I've said to to everyone in my company, including my investors, since the moment I became CEO, and it's focus and momentum. Focus on the things that matter the most and knowing what those things are always and orienting just towards those things, and momentum. Building on progress and not taking any point in progress for granted. Momentum is something that happens out of nowhere seemingly, and then simultaneously, if not nurtured, disappears in that same type of fashion and way. And so having the right people around you to make those uncontrollable things over time slowly happen, and investing in more of those things happening is how you build a business. And that's a massive learning that I've had, but is equally the hardest thing I've ever done. And the last thing I'll say on all of this is I love it. I absolutely, hands down, love it. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life, and I know that I am one of the most fortunate people in the world, that I can sit here at 33 years old and tell someone that I know exactly what I'm supposed to do with my life, and it's building companies and businesses, because I love it. People live and die and don't know the answer to that question, or don't have a conviction around what that is, and I do, and I'm grateful for it.
I love that. So many points that I want to drill down deeper on.
Yeah.
The first topic, surrender. Huge.
Yeah.
This was something that I had to, I think, and you said it exactly right. The only way you have peace is if you can surrender, fully understanding what you can control and what you can't. For me, surrender was more the transition from being outcome oriented to process oriented. Completely surrendering the outcome, only knowing that you were going to be so focused and intentional about the process, and knowing that you're going to learn things along the way about how you tweak the process, and eventually you will get the outcome, but understanding that you could do everything right and not get the outcome. You could do everything wrong and the outcome will miraculously appear. The two are not necessarily tethered all the time. I think, as you said, you'll drive yourself crazy otherwise, thinking you can control all of it.
Yep.
That was such a big learning for me. And I think also what came from that surrender for me was an element of fearlessness. Because I think there was a fear of failure potentially, or really, it wasn't even necessarily a fear of failure for me. What the fear was for me was not doing the things that I should have known I should be doing. It was an unfair expectation of myself to get everything perfect.
Sure.
And once I realized that not getting the outcome didn't necessarily mean that I wasn't doing everything perfect.
Yep.
It just meant that it wasn't the time.
Yep.
Instilled in me a sense of confidence and a sense of fearlessness. Outright, I can run at this because it doesn't even matter what happens. What I do know is that I'm going to learn a lot.
Yep.
I'm going to become stronger, going to become better. Even when I think about deals that have fallen through, that I really cared about, I think about all the learnings, all the relationships that have come from them, all of the literally sleepless nights. I've never had a career-oriented sleepless night, really, that wasn't linked to partying until this process. And I think that level of care and that level of stress, that level of care never goes away, I don't think. But the level of stress and the level of uncertainty, and almost like festering lack of confidence tied to, oh, am I doing this right? If I don't do this right, it's not going to be the outcome. So I need to be absolutely sure that I'm doing this right. I was able to release that. And I think, to your point, I've never been more at peace in a fire-like scenario than on the other side of some of these processes. I think it speaks exactly to what you were saying. I love the surrender concept.
I think that concept of fearlessness is an incredibly powerful one. And I think that, you know, analogous to the concept of being fearless is just like pure serenity almost, right? Like it's like you said, there's like a calmness that comes over you when you realize like, I've done what I can do. It is what it is. Like I'm at peace with this moment. And the other thing I love about what you're saying here is that, you know, implicit behind this concept of fearlessness is that you're no longer paralyzed by whatever that fear is to do what needs to happen. And so there's a positive sort of reinforcement process here, where as a function of recognizing what you can control and what you can't, you become that much better at the things you can control, because you're not getting caught up in, to your point, like the outcome. You're just focused solely on the process, and you get really good at it. I think it's a brilliant point. And I'm reminded of just this idea that, you know, a lot of this stuff is like in our head. Like it's we often, I think, have a survival mechanism to perceive things as worse than what they need to be. And the things that we're worried about are not life-threatening in the way that they feel sometimes. And I think having that reality check of, no matter what happens here, I'm still alive.
Yep.
And at the very like base foundation of everything, like truly what really, really matters is that. And I think that realization is a freeing thing. And I don't know that people can have that experience, and I'm biased, obviously, absent doing something like this, which I think is great.
Yep. Yeah. I agree. The two perspectives that I've taken and applied to my most recent work, and I'll apply going forward, they're related. The first is the concept of, you know, or it's an idea, but if I were to tell you that you would fail 15 times before you would succeed, how fast would you run after those failures? You know, it's this idea of not
prerequisite.
Exactly. It is a prerequisite to success. You said it earlier. I think, you know, along the same lines with the second idea, you know, I did this when I was hitting the phones trying to raise equity, was how many no's does your yes cost? And understanding that if all you need is one, then there's a cost to that one. It may be the second call, it may be the 22nd, it may be the 82nd, but there is a cost to that yes. And I was watching a famous salesman. He did a lot of cold calls. He was training a young person in this industry. And it was exactly that, but he put a number to it. He said, you know, let's say you have to make 10 calls in order to make $1,000 sale. That means that first no, you didn't make zero, you made $100. That second no, you made $100. That third no, you made $100. And so the concept that you can't look at your no's as losses. They're all part of the process. I think the mistake is getting the no and not dissecting it to see what you could learn from it, or just giving up and, you know, taking it at face value, because those no's were almost as powerful. Some of the no's that made me the most upset were the no's that required me to be hyper realistic with myself. You talked about self-honesty. There were investors that said wild things to me, which I thought at the time were wild and disrespectful. What I later realized were likely thoughts that everybody was thinking, but only they had the confidence and level of comfort to say to me. You know, doubting my experience, doubting, you know, one guy asked me if he thought, you know, if I thought the deal was too big for me. And these are questions that I know some of my peers, well, you know, we don't even have to get into that.
Sure.
These are thoughts that other people are likely thinking. But I didn't necessarily address them with those folks because they didn't bring it up, you know? But I guarantee you, going forward, I talked about deal experience more. I talked about, you know, just ways to dissuade those sorts of criticisms that largely weren't vocalized all the time. So learning from your no's, I think, too.
I think I'm reminded as you describe this of one of the best pieces of advice I received from a mentor, which was less so advice and more just the way in which he views things. But he was a professor of educational psychology at Duke, and I had him my second to last semester in college, and was very likely one of the best professors I ever had. And it was just like an elective class that I had to take. But he had this perspective that in order to truly experience something, you didn't just need to go through it, but you had to go through it and then reflect upon it. Mm-hmm. That reflection was a core component to actually say, I have had this experience. And I think to the point that you're just highlighting, it's not just a matter of accumulating no's and failures, right? And I think that's maybe like that would be an easy way to misinterpret what you're saying. It's seeking the lesson across those no's and failures to then bolster yourself for the next attempt. It's always learning, always developing. It's, again, having the experience by reflecting on what it is that you went through that got you there. And I think it's such a salient point. And maybe just as another concept broadly as we think about mentorship for a moment is I think the best mentors I've ever had have not been the ones that gave me on a plate, ready, microwave dinner, like advice of like, do this is it, right? Instead, I feel like the best mentors I've had have given me ways of thinking about the world in my life. Mm-hmm. And what's beautiful about that is that the impact that those mentors have had has actually transcended the seasons that they were important to me with specificity. Because that educational psychology professor from 2014 doesn't actually have anything to do with any of the things that I've been doing for the past 11 years since I've seen this person. But that advice is something I think about regularly all the time, because it wasn't specific to a given thing or a very unique morsel of something I should, do or think through. It was more just, this is the way in which you should move through your life. Similarly, I think about my, mentor I mentioned, Dr. Armstrong. Very little of what she told me in specificity about what to do as a freshman in college applies to my life now that I'm 33 years old. But the lessons, the concepts, the ways in which I should view the world that I very much internalized, that is transformative. And I think one thing for people that are seeking mentors or considering what mentorship can do for them or what they should be looking for in a mentor, I think is that opportunities to internalize ways of living and being and seeing the world, and less as a guidepost for this specific decision or this given instance. It's more a matter of, how is this person going to shape the rest of your life? Mm. And that, I think, is the bar of a great mentor. Even if they were only a mentor for a month or a year or the time you were in college or a job that you had for 6 months or whatever the case might be, if that mentor was able to give you something that you internalized that was generalizable enough that you could apply it to so many other parts of your life, that is a great mentor.
Final question, switching gears.
Sure.
What do you do these days to take your mind out of grind mode?
Yeah.
If you do.
Yeah, for sure. The quick answer to that latter piece is I do. I think everybody's different here. And to be fair, I've had seasons where I have done very little to take myself out of grind mode, and I've been worse for it. Honestly, I think that I wouldn't call myself the most balanced person by any stretch of the imagination, but I realize that even if I'm not balanced, seeking balance is still important. And so things that help me, I think categorically I've realized there are 3 things that I need to always feel put together. And I almost think about them as nourishment, right? And so one is nourishing my mind. And that can be in the form of reading a book, a fiction book that has nothing to do with my career or my life, or having a great conversation with a friend, or watching something that makes me think about something differently, whatever it is, or having, some sort of conundrum or problem that I have to work through or help a friend work through. That mental nourishment makes me feel whole and is helpful for me. Two is my body. I have to, and I've always been very mindful of nourishing my body. That's what I eat. That's what I do when I go run and I exercise. Whenever I've tried or have inadvertently stripped those things away from me, I immediately feel the outcome from it, and it's negative. Sleep. I truly I try to prioritize these things because I know what it's like when these things are not optimized. And whatever marginal gains I think I'm getting from that additional hour I didn't sleep, or that run I didn't go on, or that lift I didn't make, I am so much worse and less efficient and less clear-minded and less capable of doing the things I need to do, that marginal improvement I thought I gained disappears. It doesn't matter. It's not worth it. And so a true non-negotiable for me is always to nourish my body as well. And then lastly, and this part is a bit more esoteric, but by design, it's to nourish my soul. And again, I don't mean that necessarily in a religious sense, although for some that might be what it is. I think for me, it's nourishing the inner child, the thing that is most simple to me. And I think maybe put a different way, it's having fun. And fun could look different. Fun could be, traveling to another country. Fun could be going to a restaurant I've never been to in the city. Fun could be, going to Coney Island and getting on a roller coaster, right? Just something that takes me somewhere else. That's just, it's a childlike, it's play. It's purely fun. It doesn't necessarily make me better in any way, but I enjoy it. I have unbridled fun that comes from it. And that's important to me. So to sort of recap that, how I allow myself to come out of grind mode, how I allow myself to relax, is that I always nourish my mind, I always nourish my body, and I always nourish my soul. If I can do that, then I can keep on grinding. So,
excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, man. Really, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Really appreciate it.